My name is Lily, a 28-year-old woman who spent most of her life chasing small dreams in a quiet corner of Ohio. I'm not the loudest in the room, but I've got a sharp mind and a stubborn streak that's gotten me through more than a few tough spots. I met Jake 3 years ago at a friend's barbecue. His easy smile and calm demeanor pulled me in like a magnet. We clicked fast, built a life together, and after months of planning, our wedding day finally arrived. It was supposed to be perfect, a celebration of us, until my mother-in-law, Diane, grabbed the microphone at the reception and turned my world upside down. "I canceled your honeymoon," she announced, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "My son should spend that money on me." The room froze and I laughed, until I checked my bank account and saw nothing but zeros. It was March 13th, 2025, the day I thought I'd remember as the happiest of my life. The reception hall was glowing with soft lights, white flowers spilling over every table, and the hum of laughter filling the air. Jake and I had just cut the cake, his hand steady over mine, his breath warm against my ear as he whispered, "We did it, babe." I felt light, like I could float, my white dress brushing the floor as we moved through the crowd. My best friend Sarah, all wild curls and quick wit, was already tipsy, raising her glass to toast us for the third time that night. "To Lily and Jake," she shouted, "the couple who survived planning this circus." Everyone laughed, and I leaned into Jake, my heart full. Then came the sound that shattered it all, a sharp tap on the microphone. I turned, and there she was, Diane, Jake's mother, standing on the small stage in her gaudy gold dress, her lips curled into a smirk that made my stomach twist. She was 55, with a face that might have been pretty once if it weren't always pinched with entitlement. I'd known she didn't like me from the start. Her snide comments about my small-town roots and lack of ambition had been a constant hum in the background of our relationship, but I never thought she'd go this far. "Excuse me, everyone," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter like a knife. "I have a little surprise for the bride and groom." My chest tightened. I glanced at Jake, expecting him to roll his eyes, but his face was stone, his knuckles whitening around his glass. "I decided to do something special for my son," Diane went on, her tone so condescending I could feel it crawl under my skin. "He deserves the best, so I went ahead and canceled their honeymoon." The words hit me like a punch, and a nervous laugh escaped my lips. This had to be a joke, right? Some twisted attempt at humor? But she wasn't done. "Why waste all that money on a trip when he has real responsibilities? That money's better spent on family, on me." The room went silent, a suffocating hush that pressed against my ears. I forced another laugh, louder this time, clinging to the hope that she was bluffing. But her smile widened, sharp and cruel, and I knew she meant every word. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone under the table, my fingers cold against the screen. I opened the banking app, praying I'd see the thousands we'd saved for our trip to Bali, the honeymoon fund we'd built together, penny by penny, plus the generous wedding gifts from friends and family who'd wanted us to start our marriage with a dream. The screen loaded, agonizingly slow, and my breath caught in my throat like a jagged shard of glass. Zero. Nothing. Gone. My vision blurred, the numbers, or lack of them, swimming as panic clawed its way up my spine, sharp and relentless. My chest tightened, my pulse thundering in my ears, and I turned to Jake, my voice barely a whisper, fragile and pleading. "Tell me this isn't real." He exhaled hard, a sound that carried the weight of a storm, grabbed his own phone and checked his account. His face darkened, a shadow passing over his hazel eyes, turning them almost black with something I couldn't fully name. Anger, betrayal, maybe both, simmering just beneath his calm exterior. "My account's empty too," he muttered, his voice tight, each word clipped like he was holding back a flood. The reception hall seemed to shrink around me, the soft glow of the chandeliers dimming as my world tilted. Diane stood there on the stage, her gold dress glinting obnoxiously under the lights, her smirk a knife twisting in my gut. She'd just announced it, canceled our honeymoon, taken our money, like it was some grand gesture we should thank her for. The guests were frozen, their murmurs a dull hum in my ears, and I could feel their eyes on us, waiting for a reaction. My throat burned, rage and disbelief warring inside me, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak, not yet. Jake's hand tightened around his phone, his knuckles white, and I knew he was feeling it too, the same sickening drop that had hollowed me out. Then someone broke the silence. "What the hell did she just say?" It was Sarah, my best friend and maid of honor, her voice cutting through the haze like a whip. She stood a few feet away, her curly brown hair bouncing as she whipped around to face Diane, her green eyes blazing. At 28, Sarah was a firecracker, loyal to a fault and never one to hold her tongue. She'd been with me through every step of this wedding, from picking the dress to calming my nerves that morning, and now she looked ready to storm the stage. "Did I hear that right, Lily?" she said, turning to me, her hands on her hips. "She canceled your honeymoon? And took the money?" I nodded, my mouth dry, still clutching my phone like it might somehow undo what I'd seen. "It's gone," I managed, my voice cracking. "All of it." Sarah's jaw dropped, and she let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Oh, hell no. This woman's lost her damn mind." She took a step toward the stage, but before she could get far, another voice chimed in, a deep, gravelly rumble that carried authority. "Hold up now." It was Uncle Ray, Jake's uncle, pushing through the crowd. At 55, he was a bear of a man, broad-shouldered and weathered, with a salt-and-pepper beard and a no-nonsense stare that made you think twice about crossing him. He'd been a cop for 30 years before retiring to dabble in law, and he still carried that air of command. He adjusted his tie, his dark eyes narrowing at Diane. "You're telling me you drained their accounts, Diane, in front of all these people?" Diane flinched just for a second, but recovered fast, tossing her hair like a teenager caught in a lie. "Oh, Ray, don't be so dramatic," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I'm just looking out for my son. He doesn't need some frivolous trip. He needs to focus on family." She paused, then added with a smug little laugh, "On me." Uncle Ray crossed his arms, his lips pressing into a thin line. "That's not how it works, and you know it. Sounds like theft to me." The word hung in the air. Theft, sharp and heavy, and I saw a flicker of unease cross Diane's face. But she waved it off, turning back to the crowd like she was the star of her own twisted show. "I deserve it," she said, louder now, doubling down. "I raised him. That money's better off with me." I couldn't take it anymore. My legs moved before my brain caught up, and I stood, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You stole from us," I said, my voice trembling but growing stronger with every word. "That was our money, our honeymoon, our future. How could you?" My hands balled into fists at my sides, my nails digging into my palms, the pain grounding me as my anger surged. Diane laughed again, that grating, mocking sound that made me want to claw her eyes out. "Stole? Oh, honey, don't be so theatrical. You're married now. Jake's responsibilities have changed. I just redirected the funds to where they belong." She smirked at me, daring me to push back, and I felt something snap inside. But before I could lunge at her, and God, I wanted to, Jake stood, slow and deliberate, his presence like a thundercloud rolling in. "Mom," he said, his voice low, so calm it sent a shiver down my spine. "What did you spend it on?" It wasn't a question, it was a demand, quiet but unyielding, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Diane blinked, caught off guard, then plastered on that infuriating smile again. "Well," she said, counting on her fingers like she was proud of it, "I paid off some credit card bills. Those rates are outrageous, you know. Then I put a deposit on a new SUV, the luxury one I've been eyeing. And oh, I booked a little cruise for myself. Penthouse suite. You should be happy for me, Jake. I got a steal on it." My jaw hit the floor. She'd taken our Bali sunsets, our quiet nights under the stars, and traded them for her own selfish fantasy. I felt sick, my stomach twisting as the reality sank in. You replaced our honeymoon with yours?" I said, my voice breaking. Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "Lily, breathe," she whispered, but her own face was flushed with fury. "This woman's a monster." Jake didn't react, not outwardly. His fingers tapped the table, a slow, steady rhythm, and then he smiled. It wasn't his usual smile, warm and soft. This was cold, calculated, the kind of smile that promised trouble. "That's great, Mom," he said, his tone laced with something dark. "Really great." Diane hesitated, her confidence wavering. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice smaller now. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his eyes locked on hers. "I mean, it's great you spent money that wasn't yours. Because you know what that means." He pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up so she could see. "Yeah, hi," he said into it, his gaze never leaving her. "I'd like to report fraudulent activity on my account." The color drained from Diane's face, her mouth falling open. "Jake, what are you doing?" she hissed, taking a step toward him, but he didn't budge. "Yes," he continued. I'd like to dispute several unauthorized transfers. I know who did it. I've got their name and account number right here. Diane lunged, her hands outstretched like she could snatch the phone away, but Jake leaned back, keeping it out of reach. Jake, stop it! She shrieked, her voice cracking. You can't do this! He smiled wider, chillingly calm. Oh, I can. You're not on my account, Mom. You had no right to touch that money. That's theft, and banks take that pretty seriously. The guests erupted into whispers, a wave of shock rippling through the room. Sarah let out a low, "Oh, damn," her eyes wide with awe, while Uncle Ray nodded approvingly, his arms still crossed. But then another voice piped up, high and excited. "This is gold, y'all!" It was Tina, Jake's 35-year-old cousin, a drama junkie who lived for chaos and always had her phone out. She was live streaming, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, her fingers flying as she narrated. Mother-in-law just admitted to stealing the honeymoon fund. Live on my feed. Hit that follow button, folks. I barely registered her. My focus locked on Diane, who was unraveling fast. Her face was beet red, her hands shaking as she clutched the microphone like a lifeline. Jake, I'm your mother, she pleaded, her voice breaking. You wouldn't... He cut her off, his tone flat. I would. He turned to me then, his hand finding mine under the table, his thumb brushing over my knuckles, a small anchor in the storm. And by the way, Mom, he added, looking back at her, you remember that prenup you told me not to sign? The one you called insulting? Diane froze, her eyes bulging. Of course, she said, her voice trembling. Jake's grin turned sharp, triumphant. Well, I signed it anyway. She gasped, her hand flying to her chest, and I could see the panic setting in. And guess what? He went on, nodding toward my phone. One of the conditions is that our accounts stay separate, so you didn't just steal from me, you stole from Lily. Her face went ashen, her breath hitching, and I felt the shift, like the ground had tilted in our favor. She wasn't just facing Jake now, she was facing me, and I was done playing nice. I stood again, my legs steadier this time, my voice cutting through the air. You thought you could take everything we worked for, I said, staring her down. You thought you could ruin our day, our future, and we'd just let it slide, but you're wrong, Diane, you're finished. She stared back, her lips twitching, her hands clenching into fists. Then she snapped, her voice rising to a shrill scream. This is your fault. She jabbed a finger at me, her whole body trembling. You turned my son against me. He'd never have done this before you. The words hit me like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I didn't turn him against you, I said, my voice steady now, fueled by a fire I didn't know I had. You did that yourself when you stole from us. The room buzzed, tension crackling like static. Tina's phone was still up, her voice a giddy whisper. Plot twist, y'all. She's blaming the bride now. Sarah stepped closer, her arm brushing mine, her presence a quiet strength. She's delusional, she muttered, loud enough for me to hear. But Diane wasn't done. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape, and then that eerie smile crept back onto her face. Fine, she said, her tone suddenly saccharine. If I can't have the money, neither can you. My heart stopped as she yanked her phone from her purse, her fingers moving with frantic purpose. What are you doing? I demanded, stepping forward, my pulse racing. She grinned, wicked and unhinged. Just making a little call, she said, hitting the button. Hi, yes, this is Diane, she purred into the receiver. I need to report a stolen credit card. My stomach plummeted. She was trying to freeze our joint wedding account, the one we'd just fought to protect, out of pure spite. You're insane, I shouted, lunging for her, my hands outstretched, but Jake was faster. He snatched the phone from her grip and flipped it to speaker. Ma'am, the fraud rep said, her voice crisp. You're reporting a stolen card. Can you confirm the account holder's name? Diane hesitated, her mouth twitching, her eyes flicking between us. Jake raised an eyebrow, his voice low and taunting. Go ahead, Mom. Tell them. She swallowed hard, her bravado crumbling. It's my son's account, she stammered. The rep's response was immediate. Ma'am, unless you're the primary account holder, you can't report fraud on this card. False reports carry legal consequences. Diane's face collapsed, her hands shaking as the weight of her mistake crashed down. Jake laughed, a slow, dark sound that sent a thrill through me. Oh, Mom, he said, shaking his head. You just keep digging, don't you? She was trembling now, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts, her face a mask of rage and fear. She stuttered, but before she could finish, a new voice cut in, smooth and sharp, like a blade. Diane, you really stepped in it this time. It was Marcus, Jake's old college friend, a 32-year-old accountant with a knack for numbers and a dry sense of humor. He'd been quiet all night, hovering near the bar, but now he stepped forward, adjusting his glasses, a smirk playing on his lips. "I've been listening," he said, "and I just checked the transaction logs, public access stuff. You didn't even try to cover your tracks. It's all there, time-stamped, tied to your account." Diane whipped around, her eyes wild. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. Marcus shrugged, casual but cutting. "I'm talking about evidence. You moved that money through your personal banking app, same one you've been bragging about for months. It's sloppy, Diane. Even I could turn this over to the cops in 5 minutes." Her breath hitched, her hands clawing at her purse, and I felt a surge of satisfaction. She was cornered, and she knew it. Uncle Ray stepped up beside Marcus, his presence looming. "And I'd be happy to make that call," he said, his voice a low growl. "I've got friends at the precinct who'd love to hear about this, especially since you just tried to pull that fraud stunt live." Diane's head snapped toward him, her mouth opening, but no words came out. Tina, still filming, let out a gleeful, "Oh snap, she's toast now." I watched her unravel piece by piece, and it felt good. Too good, maybe. But she wasn't done fighting. "This is ridiculous," she spat, forcing a laugh that sounded desperate. "Are you really going to ruin your wedding over a misunderstanding?" That word again, misunderstanding, lit a fuse in me. I stepped closer, my voice shaking but strong. "You don't get to call it that," I said, my anger spilling over. "You stole from us, Diane. You took our money, spent it on yourself, and now you're trying to sabotage us again. That's not a misunderstanding, that's who you are." Her fake smile faltered, her eyes darting around the room, but no one came to her defense. Not a single soul. Jake folded his arms, his breath sharp. "You know what, Mom?" he said, his voice steady. "I've been waiting to say this for a long time. I'm done with you. I kept you around because I hoped you'd change, but tonight proved you won't. So after this, we're finished." Her eyes widened, her body stiffening like she'd been slapped. "You don't mean that," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I do," he said, and the finality in his tone was a wall she couldn't climb. He took my hand, his fingers warm against mine, and kissed my knuckles, a quiet promise. "You took our money," he said to her, "so now I'm taking something from you. You don't have a son anymore." The room gasped, a collective intake of breath, and Diane shattered. She screamed, a raw, guttural sound that echoed off the walls, her foot stomping like a child in a tantrum. "You ungrateful," she started, but Jake turned away, pulling me with him. "Let's go, babe," he said softly. "We've got a wedding to enjoy." We walked off, leaving her there, a broken figure in a sea of stairs, and I felt the weight lift, finally fully free. Fully. Jake's hand was warm in mine, his grip steady as we moved through the crowd, the whispers and gasps fading into a dull roar behind us. My heart still pounded, a wild rhythm of relief and adrenaline, but with every step, the air felt lighter, cleaner, like I'd shed a skin I didn't know I'd been wearing. Sarah caught up to us, her heels clicking fast against the polished floor, her face split into a grin that was equal parts shock and glee. "Lily, Jake, that was insane," she said, her voice breathless. "I mean, I've seen some wedding drama, but that was a freaking masterpiece." I managed a shaky laugh, my chest loosening just enough to let it out. "Yeah, well, I didn't sign up for this script," I said, glancing at Jake. He squeezed my hand, his eyes softening for the first time all night, a flicker of the man I'd fallen for cutting through the storm he'd just unleashed. "We're done with her," he said quietly, more to himself than to me, but the words carried a finality that settled deep in my bones. I nodded, leaning into him, the chaos of the night still buzzing in my veins but starting to fade, replaced by something stronger. Us. Tina's voice floated over, still narrating her live stream like a sportscaster on overtime. "And the bride and groom are out, folks. Mother-in-law's down for the count. Stay tuned for the fallout." I caught a glimpse of her near the bar, her phone held high, her eyes glinting with the thrill of it all. Marcus joined her, sipping a whiskey and shaking his head, his voice dry as he muttered, "She's gonna regret not hiring me to hide that paper trail." Uncle Ray lingered near the stage, his phone to his ear now, his low growl unmistakable as he spoke to someone, probably one of his old cop buddies. "Yeah, I've got witnesses," he said, glancing at Diane, who was still standing there, trembling, her gold dress a garish spotlight on her unraveling. I didn't look back at her, not yet. I couldn't. The rage was still there, simmering under my skin, but it was mixed with a strange, hollow pity. She'd done this to herself, built this disaster brick by brick, and now she was alone in the wreckage. Jake pulled me toward the dance floor, where a few guests had started to recover, the music kicking back in, a slow, tentative melody that felt like a lifeline. "Dance with me," he said, his voice soft but firm, and I let him lead me, my hands finding his shoulders, his arms wrapping around my waist. We swayed, the world shrinking to just us, and for a moment I could breathe again. But the night wasn't over. Not quite. As we danced, I caught snippets of conversation swirling around us, the guests piecing together the aftermath like detectives at a crime scene. "She's screwed," someone whispered nearby, a woman in a blue dress I vaguely recognized as Jake's aunt. "Bank's already on it. Reversed the charges this morning, I heard." Another voice, a guy with a beard, chimed in. "Yeah, and her accounts are frozen. Fraud flags don't mess around." My ears perked up, my head tilting toward Jake. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice low. He nodded, a small, satisfied smirk tugging at his lips. "Good," he said simply, and I felt a rush of vindication. Every dollar she'd stolen, ours again, every selfish plan she'd made, crumbling. I pictured her now, alone in her over-decorated house, her phone silent, her SUV dreams and cruise tickets nothing but ash. It wasn't enough to erase what she'd done, but it was a start, a damn good one. Sarah sidled up again, her energy buzzing as she handed me a glass of champagne. "Drink," she ordered, her eyes gleaming. "You earned it after that showdown." I took it, the cool glass grounding me, and sipped, the bubbles sharp against my tongue. "So," she said, leaning in, "Tina's video's already at 50,000 views. Diane's trending. Worst mother-in-law ever. People are losing their minds online." I choked on my drink, a laugh bubbling up despite myself. "Seriously?" I asked, wiping my mouth. She grinned, pulling out her phone to show me. A flood of comments, memes, even a hashtag. #DianeDownfall. "Yep," she said. "She's a cautionary tale now." I glanced at Jake, who raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Let them talk," he said, his voice steady. "She brought it on herself." And he was right. She had. Every choice, every lie, every smug word had built the trap she'd fallen into. I thought about the years she'd spent guilting him, manipulating him, and how he'd finally broken free. It wasn't just about the money, it was about us, our life, our boundaries. She'd crossed them all, and now she'd pay. The next morning, we woke up tangled in the hotel sheets, the sunlight streaming through the curtains, soft and golden. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I groaned, reaching for it. A text from Sarah. "Check your account." My heart skipped, and I opened the banking app, Jake leaning over my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. There it was, the full amount, back where it belonged, plus a little extra from some glitch or generous guest I couldn't tell. "We're whole again," I whispered, a smile spreading across my face. He kissed my temple, his lips lingering. "Better than whole," he said. "We're rid of her." But the story didn't end there, not fully. Weeks later, word trickled back through the family grapevine, carried by Tina's relentless updates and Uncle Ray's gruff reports. Diane's account stayed frozen, her cruise canceled, her car deposit lost in limbo. The police had paid her a visit. Not an arrest, not yet, but a stern warning that any more mistakes would land her in cuffs. She'd become a ghost, cut off by friends, shunned by relatives, her name a punchline in every group chat. I heard she'd tried calling Jake once, leaving a rambling voicemail he deleted without listening. "She's desperate," he told me, his voice flat, and I nodded, feeling nothing but a cold, quiet relief. Months passed and life settled into something new, something ours. We didn't rush to Bali, not right away. Instead, we took our time, rebuilding, savoring the peace she could no longer touch. But one day, as summer faded into fall, Jake turned to me over breakfast, his eyes bright. "Let's go somewhere," he said. "Greece, maybe. First class. The works." My heart leapt, a thrill chasing away the last shadows of that night. "Really?" I asked, and he grinned, pulling me into his lap. "Really. Let's show her what she couldn't take." So we did. We booked the trip, upgraded seats, a villa by the sea, every detail a middle finger to her memory. The guests who'd watched her fall chipped in, a quiet rebellion against her greed, and when we posted the photos, me in a sundress, Jake laughing against a backdrop of blue waves, I knew she'd see them. I hoped she'd choke on everyone. Tina swore she'd heard Diane was holed up somewhere, scrolling through our happiness, her pride in tatters, her world shrunk to nothing but regret. And that's where it ends. Or doesn't. We're out here, living, thriving, every day a victory she'll never know. Diane? She's stuck, a prisoner of her own making, her story a warning etched in the ashes of her choices. I've learned something through all this. You don't owe anyone your peace, not family, not blood, not guilt. You fight for what's yours, and you let the thieves drown in their own nets. So here's my question to you. Whoever's reading this, what would you have done? Would you have walked away, or would you have burned it all down like we did? Tell me. I want to know. Because this isn't just our story anymore, it's yours too.